Welcome back to Cultivating Conversations, your go-to space for all things HR, leadership, and workplace compliance. I'm your host, Tisha Newby. I'm an attorney, HR consultant, and the founder of Cultivate HR Consulting. So whether you're a business owner, employee, or HR professional, this podcast is here to give you real-world insights and actionable strategies to help you build thriving and complying people-centered workplaces. In today's conversation, we are talking all about a topic that impacts every single workplace: mental wellness. So let's be real: burnout, stress, and mental health challenges don't just affect individuals, they are going to affect the entire team. They'll affect a company culture, and they ultimately affect and can have impact on business success. And yet, so many organizations still struggle with how to support their employees in a way that actually makes a difference. So that's why I'm thrilled to be joined by Ruby Brown Herring, the founder of RBH Wellness Solutions and a leader in the workplace mental health space. Ruby has helped businesses, employees, and leaders create healthier work environments through mental health wellness strategies that actually work. And in this episode, we're diving into how you can take those practical steps to create mentally healthy workplaces. We'll explore the biggest challenges that employees are facing today and how leadership impacts mental well-being. We're also going to talk about what business can do to actually foster a culture that truly supports their people. So, whether you're a business owner trying to build a supportive culture, a manager leading a team, or an employee navigating workplace challenges, this episode is going to be for you. Mental wellness isn't just a leadership issue, it's truly something that impacts us all. So I am excited to be joined in this conversation with Ruby today. I mentioned that this topic is all about wellness in the workplace. And let's be real: burnout, stress, mental health challenges, they impact entire teams, right? We know that so many organizations are still struggling with how to support their employees in a way that actually makes a difference. So today, whether you are a business owner trying to build a supportive culture, if you're a manager just leading a team, or even if you're just an employee navigating the workspace, this episode is going to be for you. Mental wellness isn't just a leadership issue, right? It is something that impacts us all. So if you are feeling overwhelmed at work, if you struggle with burnout, or if you've ever just wondered, like, how do I create a healthier work environment? We're going to talk about it today. So let's go ahead and dive on into it. Hi, Ruby. Welcome. I'm so excited that you are here with me today.
Hey, Letitia, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's get started. Can you tell me a little bit about really what inspired you to establish RBH Wellness Solutions, and tell me some about your journey into the mental health and wellness space?
Yeah. My business started out in 2018. I got laid off in 2017 unexpectedly. So for the first time in my adult career, I found myself looking for a job because I had to, not because I wanted to. And initially, it was called hearing, training, and consulting because I was like, what do I know that I can do? And it was provide training, specifically mental health first aid training. Um, and it was over the course of 2018, as I was navigating that layoff and doing a job search. I had a friend of mine that connected me with an organization that said, hey, we know what mental health first aid is. We don't want you to sell that to us. We want you to help us figure out a strategy to
Mhm.
incorporate it into our employee well-being strategy. And I was like, oh, what's that? And so during my research prepping for that strategy session, I learned all about employee well-being. And so after giving it a lot of thought and really have finding a place, and especially as we moved into the pandemic, I was like, this is my jam. I like this because I'm a mental health advocate, and it's a passion. And so it just allowed me to merge the two worlds together. And so it was December 16th, 2020, that RBH Wellness Solutions was born. And it has been a labor of love that I have enjoyed.
Man, I love that. And really, I mean, I think you said something that so many people often deal with it's how you took this negative experience, right? Where you were being laid off for the first time in your career and you turned it into something that ultimately led you to your jam, right? Like
Yeah.
that is, that's goals right there. So that's very exciting, trusting yourself and really thinking, how can I take my current knowledge and build onto that, right?
Yeah.
And now it's turned into something and that is so important and so helpful. And I think even after the pandemic, like you said, we are seeing even more
Mhm.
conversations in this
Mhm.
space, right?
Mhm.
So I know that RBH Wellness Solutions provides a variety of services, right?
Mhm.
So can you tell me a little bit more about the programs and the strategies that your organization uses to help enhance employee engagement and retention?
Yeah, I approach this work from a collaborative perspective, right? I come in as a subject matter expert, but only in the sense of I know employee well-being from that subject matter expertise. I really rely on my clients to provide me the expertise around what their organization is experiencing and work alongside them. And so it ranges from the programs that we offer ranges from folks will sometimes just bring me in to do a keynote speaking engagement for an event on a well-being topic. And one of the most common ones that I typically present on is it's called "Who Is Your Person? The Power of Connection in the Workplace," and
Mm,
really looking at loneliness in the workplace and how it's
mm,
impacting productivity and the like. So you have those one-off things like that. You have some one-offs. Hey, we just want to do a workshop because our employees, you all are doing all these employee surveys, right? And it came up that a lot of people mentioned we need to do a mental health training or something, and so they'll bring me in to do a one-off training. I don't like just doing one-off trainings because you don't really get to move the needle, but I'll do it, right? Because I think people that need to hear it will be in the room. um, but then I also have the signature program where we really kind of get under the peep under the hood and really look at that organizational culture. And so I can work with a company in three different ways. And it's either a 3 month, 6 month, or 12-month commitment. And essentially at 3 months, it means I'm helping them look at their data. We're looking at EAP data. We're looking at those employee surveys and having conversations about, okay, what are those gaps?
mhm,
Even looking at some of their health insurance claims. Are we seeing an increase in those mental health claims? And looking at that data and then putting together a full strategy that can be implemented. And so with 3 months, I help them create the strategy, hand it off to them, and they implement. I provide a 1 hour coaching session over that 3 month period just to
okay,
provide some technical assistance. 6 months, um, I help them implement it and then provide that coaching. And then the 12-month option, but they're basically getting me as kind of like, I think in the HR world, it's that fractional
right,
um, kind of role. And
right.
so I'm coming in as an employee, implementing, helping them build it and implementing the strategy within. And that's where we tend to see the most benefit, right? Because we have the strategy, and then based upon where we are in the implementation phase, we can reevaluate it and adjust it based
Right.
upon the need of folks. So that's really the sweet spot where I love working with organizations in, because it's really about, for me, that culture change. Yes, we can check a box, but if you're really committed to the well-being of your employees, which leads to, as you mentioned in the beginning, it impacts that bottom line.
That's right.
And one of the first things I say with a new client, do you want to save money?
Right.
And if the answer is yes, then it needs to be a long-term thing.
Right, right. And I think that's so important too. When you think about a lot of times, especially when we talk about training, right? Hiring
Mhm.
a consultant to come in and do some training, if you're not having that consistent work throughout, it takes time to
Mhm.
create long-term change, right? It's
Yep.
great to come in and provide information, but to really see change, it has to be sustained. And so whether that's through partnership or whether that's you coming in and really managing that for the organization. I think that's a great service that you offer in that way.
Thank you for that.
Mental health is huge right now, right? And we know, not that I think it's always been huge, but we are talking about it so much
Mhm.
more. And I think the pandemic really shed a lot of light on people's experiences, people working remotely, kids being home from school, all of the things, right, that has had an impact. What are some of those common mental health challenges that you've observed amongst clients that you've supported? And how can organizations proactively address some of that?
Yeah, and you're right. The pandemic, I think, pulled the sheets back on a problem that was already bubbling up. And a couple of things, we often hear some of the common signs and symptoms that folks in the workplace are experiencing, like stress and burnout.
Right.
And I mention those because I want folks to recognize they in themselves are not a mental illness. They are a sign or a symptom of some type of stressor. And so when we think about mental health challenges, one thing that I also want to think it's important for folks that are watching to understand, I'm not a clinician, so I can't diagnose folks. I don't
Right.
do counseling or therapy, but I've been a mental health educator and program manager for 20 years, and have lived experience.
Okay.
Um, so what we're seeing in terms of the most common diagnoses are in line with what we're seeing in the general population. It's anxiety
Mm.
and depression. And especially during the pandemic, we've seen a major uptick in substance use
Mm.
disorders, um, in individuals. Because especially in the beginning of the pandemic, we were home, and folks were
Mm.
like, "Oh, I'm stressed about the world being shut down. Let me go grab a glass of wine, or let me take another one of these pain medicines because my back's hurting because I've been sitting a little bit longer."
Right.
So those are the main three types of disorders that we're seeing in folks. And again, with anxiety and depression, it's all three of them substance use disorders. They're kind of like an umbrella term, and there are a lot of subcategory disorders up under that.
Yeah.
But they are the most common that we're seeing.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you're right. I think, even being home, as the world starts to kind of transition back into the workplace, right? There are a lot of companies that are going
Hmm.
back. There are a lot of
Hmm.
companies who are still working from home or doing some version of a hybrid, right?
Yeah.
Trying to find that balance between
Hmm.
flexibility for the employee, but also creating that space and
Hmm.
connection, right? To kind of help combat some of that. So I do think that that's also really important. In this work and in this space and organizations, we know that managers have huge impacts, right? Like they're our first line of defense. Those are the individuals that when something happens, that's who the employee is going to go to. They have the direct eyesight on the employee throughout the day, or the continual conversations with the employee if they're not in person. How can business leaders and our managers really work to foster that culture that prioritizes mental health and wellness, so that we can actually get to that point to see change to where there is true support for the employee's well-being, right? What are some things that they should be doing or thinking about?
My goodness, that is such a great question, and I think it's important, an important conversation to have. One of the main things that managers and leaders can do is lead by example. And I know we saw that, and I keep referencing the pandemic because I think it's important for folks to recognize kind of where we were at one time in terms of having these conversations, and then where we are now. I'm sure folks, if they reflect back on the pandemic, a lot of leaders, CEOs even, were coming out talking about their challenges with mental health struggles during the pandemic. Well, just because we are quote unquote out of the pandemic, it doesn't mean that you don't need to be as transparent.
That's right.
Um, Things haven't gone back to the way that they were on February 1st, 2020.
That's right.
So leading from that place of transparency and vulnerability, I kind of hear my mama in my ear saying, well, you don't need to tell everybody your business. And you don't. But there's something to be said when a manager who is viewed as this, really distinguished individual, or a CEO that's as this distinguished individual, and you're sharing, yeah, I'm struggling today too. It
Right.
makes me feel a little more human,
That's right.
and a little less alone. And so I think one of the leading by example is one of the first things they can do. I think the second thing is really thinking about looking at your internal culture. I know a
Mhm.
lot of organizations have been looking at culture over the last few years, but really taking a hard look at that organizational culture, and that includes the policies that you have in
That's right.
place. Um, Coming back to work policies,
Right.
how are they going to impact your teams? And really thinking about, where can I allow that continued flexibility, even if the outside world is saying everybody needs to go back to work. You don't have to be like the next person if
That's
that's
right.
not the fit for your organization. So I think those are two things, and I think the third piece is just creating a safe space where folks are comfortable saying, I'm struggling. And I'll give you an example, Letitia, what that looked like for me before I started working full time for myself. In the middle of the pandemic, I worked for the state of North Carolina.
Mm.
And I remember being on a virtual meeting with my manager and the rest of our team. We were a small team. There were five of us. And she opened up the meeting and she said, how y'all doing? And everybody sat there like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were like, yeah. And I'm just saying, I'm not saying that because, I don't
Right.
want you to think I'm not doing my job, because
Right.
I was working for a state agency who historically you didn't get to work from home.
Right.
And so the fact that we had that flexibility because they pretty much had to let us, right? I was like, yeah, I'm not screwing this up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so she sat there and she held that silence, which makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And she leaned into her screen like this, and she said, "I'm struggling, y'all."
Mm-hmm.
She's like, "I miss my routine. I miss being in the office with y'all." And it was just like as soon as she leaned in and said that, I know for me, I felt my shoulders go back.
That's right.
And when she finished saying what she had to say, then somebody else chimed in, and we all started chiming in then because she held that space. She was comfortable
Right.
with that silence and held that space and said, "Okay, well, let me just let them know I'm struggling too." And
Yeah.
then we all shared. So I think it's creating those conversations. Oftentimes when folks start meetings, they go straight into that agenda. And so instead of starting right into that agenda, take 45 seconds to a minute to ask your people how they're doing. And wait for them to respond. And not wait from the sense of, well, I'm gonna make you say something,
That's
but
right.
just give people that moment to process the question and to feel like whether or not they're safe to share what they're experiencing. And if
That's
nobody
right.
says anything, that's okay. Acknowledge that and say, you know what? That is perfectly fine if you don't feel like sharing right now. But just know you can come see me, or just
That's
know
right.
whatever, go see you, talk to your manager. But
That's right.
creating that space for folks, because I think such a fast-paced world where it's like we got 15 items to do, we got 15 minutes to meet.
That's right.
Let's hurry up. But we've got to bring that human element back into it.
That's right. And I think that's so important. I think there's several things that you just said that I was really excited to hear, which is one about that vulnerability and transparency. I think as leaders, we often think, oh, we got to be perfect. We got to be right. We don't want to show people that we don't have it all together, but we are still human, And for me, like one of the things I always bring to my leadership is I am a human being. Guess
That's
what? I'm
it.
not always going to know everything. I'm not always going to have the right answer. I'm not always going to say the right exact thing. And I'm not always going to feel the best, right? But I try to bring that transparency to my team so that they're also comfortable sharing with me when things are going rough for them, right? Or they're having a bad
Right.
day. And then I think the other thing too is like when you have those group sessions, right? And there's that silence that you talked about, recognizing that not everybody is comfortable speaking up. So
Hmm.
finding time to go check in on that person, maybe during your one-on-one, hey, just want
Yep.
to check in. How you doing? What's going on? How are you feeling? To really help establish that relationship so that person may become more comfortable over time, right? People
Hmm.
can tell when you are not
Hmm.
genuine. I tell my managers all the time, they can tell. So you really need to care about your
Hmm.
employees and what they're dealing with. Because if you come to them just saying, well, how you doing? And it is some, surface level, how you
Child.
doing? They are
Mm.
not going to break down those walls
I
to
don't know
really
how
tell
I'm
you what's
doing. How
going
you
on.
doing? Right. That's
That's right. That's
like,
right.
yeah. Yeah.
That's
No,
right.
you're
So,
you're so, I appreciate that, Letitia, because you said what you shared about what you say to your team about, I'm human. And I think that's the thing that we as leaders, because I've been in a leadership role in my previous career, where we get into those spots and those seats and we forget that.
right.
And my mama used to say, and and these little, we all have those people in our lives that we now like, oh, I get what you mean.
Right.
Um, you know, that I think gives me a great comparison to what you were just saying. And I'm like, yeah, that is true, reminding us who we are. Folks used to say, oh, you get too friendly with the pastor, in terms of how she joke around and would interact with him. And she's like, well, he put his pants on like me, one leg at a time.
That's right.
And so it's the reminder, I think, for all of us. Yes, you have earned your role,
That's right.
and we appreciate, and it's valued. But don't forget, you're human just like everybody else, because the universe, God, whoever your higher power is, will humble you
That's right.
real
That's
quick like.
absolutely right. That's absolutely right. So, too, as we think about this in the workplace setting, one of the things I'm constantly talking about, thinking about is metrics, right? I think in a lot of organizations they're looking at metrics and numbers. How do we quantify some of this, right? How do we determine whether or not what we're doing is actually effective, whether our wellness programs are actually getting us where we want to go? What should we be thinking about when it comes to metrics and really looking at, are we doing this right, right? Is it working for us?
Yeah, one of the easiest ways with, especially with programming, is really just your typical kind of Likert scale evaluation. So I did continuing education for 10 years and was well versed in the, okay, we're doing a training program, let's do our evaluation and look at this Likert scale 1 to 5, but also let's ask some questions where we're able to gauge behavior change based upon
Right.
what you knew and how you reacted before, and how has that moved the needle. And so I think that's one of the key things, and that's one of the things that I like doing with the clients that I work with is, okay, this is what we're sharing. We're gonna do our quick evaluation at the end of that session to get that real in time feedback. Right?
Right.
Was it practical? Would you use it? Was it
Right.
engaging?
Right.
But then 2 weeks later, we're going to do a follow up survey that asks a
Yes.
little bit deeper questions. Are you applying it? And
Right.
then 2 weeks after that, we're going to do a follow up survey. How has this behavior changed? And that's critical because oftentimes people leave trainings and like, well, I'm not using this. But
That's
once
right.
you have those follow up surveys or even follow up conversations, they see that they have. I'll give you an example of a client of mine, Pfizer pharmaceutical manufacturing plant down in Sanford, hired me 3 years ago to do mental health first aid training.
Okay.
And for those folks that don't know about mental health first aid, it's a public education program, so you don't have to be a mental health professional, but it trains people to recognize signs and symptoms of mental health challenges, how to have conversations with folks, and then connect them to professional help. And so they were seeing a increase in mental health challenges in that plant,
Mhm.
and other job stressors, because it was 2021 and the
Right.
pandemic and the vaccine, right?
Right.
And so we had a conversation about the training, and the HR professional that I was talking with said, okay, so after you do the training, what's next? And I was like, yes. And so we had some conversation about, okay, what we could do next. And so what I did for them, I created this kind of debriefing session where, because of their schedule, we waited 30 days.
Okay.
But I came back in 30 days, met with the folks that wanted to meet with me, and we had a conversation. This is what we talked about. How are you using the action plan?
Yes.
What challenges are you having? Because it's important that we celebrate those places where they're using those skills and don't
Right.
even know it. But
Right.
we're also helping them talk through situations. Well, this is what I did. I'm not sure if that's right, or I wasn't sure how to handle this, and kind of helping them build some of that confidence. So that's just an example of what Pfizer did. And then I had a similar situation with Boston Public Health Commission, where we use that same model, and the you can tell a difference in folks from the day of the training
Hmm.
through that coaching session, where we're saying, okay, let's talk about what you learn and how are you using it. So those are the easiest metrics to measure from that programming perspective. I think the other thing that organizations can also do too is go back to that EAP data. Are you
Hmm.
seeing, have those calls into EAP gone up or down? Have your medical benefits, if you have mental health benefits coverage, has that increased or decreased? And so looking
Right.
at some of those same data points that we looked at on the front end can be helpful as well.
Yeah, and I think I love that because the part about coming back in to really check in, when you do training, right? Like you have to have those follow-ups, right?
You
They
do.
say, when people walk away from training, it takes like minutes before they
Right.
lose some of that. And so you
Hmm.
have to kind of continue to have those reinforcement points to keep
Hmm.
the information fresh, to keep it top of mind. And I love that having kind of the group coaching session because people get a chance to kind of talk
Yeah.
together. How are they using it? What's working? You might hear something from somebody else that's like,
Yep.
oh, they did that. That's going to be
Exactly.
great. I'm going to try that next time,
Yep.
So I
Yeah.
really think there's a lot of value in those group sessions as
Yeah.
well. So I love that you do that with your clients, and I'm sure they find a lot of value from that as well. Yeah.
They really enjoyed it. Both of the groups that I mentioned really enjoyed it. And I think what it does, it helps them strengthen, that collaboration internally.
That's
Because
right.
I'm just there facilitating the conversation. That's all I'm
That's right.
doing.
That's right.
They're the
That's right.
ones leading I mean, I have, here's a question, and I ask one question, and it just goes from there. They're having the conversation. I'm just there to help steer the conversation along.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And so for organizations that may want to get started, like maybe they're like, hey, I think this is something, my organization could benefit from, what steps should they take really to ensure that the programs become effective and that they become sustainable? Do you have any
Yeah.
tips or guidance in that space?
Yeah, I think the first thing that organizations should do is have your key leadership decision makers sit around the table and have a conversation. Because without that key leadership conversation and buy-in, nothing's going to change, right? You're not going to be
Mhm.
able to move the any initiative forward. So I think doing that first and then looking at what are your resources. A lot of organizations have great EAP programs that can help with this work. And
Right,
so then comes to having a conversation with them, and really from that perspective of, don't give us your canned stuff, right? Because a lot of organizations, and not just EAPs, because I have a lot of canned programs. Mental health first aid is a canned program,
right.
but don't just give us your canned stuff, but really have them customize it to meet the needs of that organization.
That's right.
um and that's the thing. I think that's the key piece that a lot of or business owners and leaders miss, is they'll go to their EP and say, hey, we need you to come in and talk about X, Y, and Z, and they can
Mhm.
do that. But I would just gently push back and say, if they're going to be your go-to, make sure you're asking them that hard question around customization to your
Mhm.
client, to your employee
That's right.
base, because it's going to look different.
That's
Because
right.
if it's an organization, if it's an EAP that's serving tech and finance, how this session is held in a finance industry is going to look much different than a tech industry.
That's
And they
right.
need to be able to think about how they're presenting it from that lens.
Right.
Um, and I think the other thing that needs to happen, and this goes back to that first meeting that they have with the leadership as a leadership team, you got to be ready to peek under the hood and
That's
know
right.
that there's going to be some stuff that it's not going to be pretty.
That's right.
And it's okay for that to be acknowledged, because here's the secret, if they don't know, their employees know it's not pretty under that hood.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? And
That's
so, and
right.
oftentimes it's like, well, we have, what, bells and whistles, we all good. Mm-mm, pull that
That's
hood,
right.
lift that hood up. And
That
I
is right.
and it's hard and scary, but I guarantee you, when you have that commitment to show what's not so good under the hood, then that needle starts to move and
That's
you have
right.
greater impact. Because when you're acknowledging those things that are not so good, now you know what you're looking for in terms of where that change is happening.
Right. And employees, I think, appreciate that as well, right?
Yeah.
Because, it's one thing to try to sell the organization, right? Which in HR, we know we got to do that, right? Especially when you try to
Hmm.
get new talent, you want to
Yep.
sell the organization. But guess what? It's twofold. If you sell an organization and your new employee comes in and it's not what you sold them, they're going to turn around and be out the door, right? So that's not going to help
That's
you.
it.
And employees know, to your point, right? Like if we can acknowledge
Yeah.
where we have gone wrong and the work that we are doing to intentionally
Absolutely.
change this, employees appreciate that
They do.
transparency,
They do.
right?
Even if it takes you longer to right the ship,
That's
when they
right.
see that you're truly making that effort, oh
That's
yeah,
right.
because there's an organization I've been a contractor with for 8 years, something like that. It's been a while, and I tell them all the time. And the VP for this initiative is a really dear friend of mine. And I was like, girl, listen, I am y'all. I'm with y'all 10 toes down, but I'm gonna tell you when you ain't doing right.
That's right.
And there's something about that, and she has really owned it
Mm-hmm.
with the contractors that work with us,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, yeah, y'all, no, y'all, we broken, and I'm
That's right.
trying to fix it.
That's
And
right.
guess what? We all hanging around through all
That's
of the
right.
growing pains, and like, oh, we take 5 steps forward and 10 steps backwards,
Right.
but we see
We keep
some
going.
movement, and
That's right.
employees are gonna employees, I'm telling you, because I've seen it, I've done it myself. If they see that you're putting the effort in to do that hard work, even when it's uncomfortable,
That's right.
they're gonna be right. They're gonna be a road dog. They're
That's
really gonna be
right.
right there.
That's right. Because you are investing in making change, right? Like you
Hmm.
acknowledge that this is a little broken, but we want it to be better, and we are going to invest in trying to make this
Yep.
better for everyone here, right? And
Yep.
people can appreciate that, even if it's
Absolutely.
not perfect. It's like, all right, we trying. We
That's
and
it.
then you have that foresight of like we're going to get there.
We're gonna get
you're
there.
excited about getting there. We're going to
Right.
keep
And that
trying.
you are part of it.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we talked a little bit earlier about remote work, right? Remote and
Hmm.
hybrid work models. And, we know that some of our mental health challenges are being magnified, right? Because of
Hmm.
the amount of remote work, hybrid work that's
Hmm.
happening. What strategies do you suggest that organizations can implement to support their remote employees so that they can still allow that flexibility, but also provide that support for their employees?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I remember having this with the client in South Florida, just as things were opening back up. And one of the first things that I said to them is, please don't do virtual happy hours. And they're like, but why? I'm like, here's the thing. You make the assumption that everybody likes to drink alcohol, number one.
That's right. That's right.
Um, what if you have somebody that's in recovery,
That's right.
right?
That's
And
right.
so I am that person. Don't do virtual happy hours. Don't even
Yeah.
do real happy hours, because
Right.
not, or if you do have it in a setting where there are non-alcoholic beverages, but don't, because people tend to assume that everybody likes to drink.
Right.
So that's what not to do. I think, one of the things that's important to keep in mind when you're looking at hybrid work settings and remote work settings is each of those employees are going to be different in terms of what they need, right? So for me, as a remote employee, I'm that person. Yeah, I can do a couple of meetings. I can come into the office one day, but don't I can't be in back to back meetings 4 days a week,
Right.
because you're gonna lose me.
Right.
Um, and so just having conversations with individuals and asking them what their needs are or what works best for them. So
Right.
you ask them, but in while you're asking them and having that conversation, be very clear, because I think this is where we get in our own way sometimes, is we ask these questions as if, oh, we're going to do exactly what you're saying and
Right.
asking for, right? And so frame it in the context of, we're trying to find a medium place for everybody, a middle ground for everybody. And we recognize that not everybody is going to be happy, but we're going to do the best that we can to find that middle ground. I think that's key, because oftentimes it's been my experience, personally as a professional, but also with some of my clients. Well, we know what they want, and we're going to just tell them this is the way it's going to be. And I'm like, yeah, no, that ain't going to work.
That's right.
And so having that conversation, but just being very transparent. We're not saying we're going to do all of these things, but if you're truly able to try to take a lot of things in consideration, do that. I think the other thing too, this is when you're looking at your policies, and I know folks run their businesses the way that they feel is best for that business.
Right.
I encourage folks, as they're looking at particularly the return to work mandates that we're seeing coming in from a lot of organizations, do you really need to have people in the building for the work to continue?
Right.
Because for the last 4 years,
Right.
your work has been happening.
That's right.
Okay. And so, is it really worth risking an employee that's productive, that's engaged, that's helping you move the work forward? But it's like,
That's
yeah, no,
right.
I'm not driving up in there
That's
to sit
right.
up in the building. and you're saying, well, then you need to find another job. Really think long and hard about that,
Yeah.
because you can have a building full of folks that ain't doing work, right? And five people at home that are giving it their 150%.
Yep.
So really evaluate those policies and remember the human aspect. As you know, I do a lot of work with HR professionals. While I'm not one myself, I have become quite familiar with the work. And just again, from my own personal experience working with HR folks as an employee for somebody else, um, they sometimes forget, some HR professionals forget the human part of their title.
That's
And so
right.
I just encourage folks to think about, just think about the human piece, because there's this book, it's called Dying for a Paycheck, that mentions that um, my relationship with my manager has more impact on my health than me seeing my healthcare professional.
Yep.
And so when your interactions with the person has that kind of impact on them, remember the human piece as you're making those decisions. And I think the last thing that I would add to that, and this came up in an event that I was in a couple months ago. We were talking about, you know, Warbit, hybrid workplaces and remote work, and there was conversations around
Mm-hmm.
cameras on, cameras off. And I shuddered because, as again, this is things for people to consider as they're evaluating how to navigate hybrid and remote work. Really, really think hard about your camera policies.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, do you need a camera policy?
Right.
And I'm just gonna leave it at that. Just
Right.
something to reflect on.
Right.
And because I had an individual that said, "Oh yeah, you need to have a policy for folks to be on camera for every meeting." And the mental health educator side of me, who knows about trauma and how it impacts people, just melted. Because here's
Yeah.
the thing: when we think about, let's just think about inclusion. Right?
Right.
This is not about the back and forth, or now about DEI. Let's just
Right.
think about inclusion. If you, as an organization, within your organizational pillars, or your key guiding principles, or whatever those nice little words are that you put on walls and they're on the website, right? If inclusion is in any of those, whether it's directly the word or it's inferred,
Right.
if you're requiring people to be on camera for virtual meetings, you're not being inclusionary.
Right. Right.
And here's the thing, because, and so somebody said, well, why wouldn't people want to be on camera? And, and I said, and I turned around and I said, well, I don't like looking at myself half the time. Right. But here's the thing to think about, because I had to joke in that moment, because I was like, you got to be kidding me. But the
Right.
reality is, there are a lot of professionals, HR professionals, and businesses and organizations that are requiring folks to be on camera.
Right.
Here's the thing that we know. We know now, because we found out a year into the pandemic and everybody being in remote spaces, that there is a thing called Zoom fatigue. There is a
Mm-hmm.
psychological diagnosis, folks. So just like depression and anxiety, there is a diagnosis for Zoom fatigue. So that's real. It is
Right.
draining. If you think about folks that may be neurodiverse or neurospicy, or whatever term it
Yep.
is that you like to use, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's exhausting. I am not diagnosed as having ADHD, but I think I have ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I tell you, when I'm in a meeting and I have more than four pictures on the screen or Hollywood squares, I'm dating myself. It's hard to follow and track
That's
everybody,
right.
because you're looking for, where's the light, green light gonna blue light up if you're on Zoom. If you're on Teams, which is the blue light? Where's it? And that's a lot.
Right.
And so that can cause a first person to feel overwhelmed and be like, you know what? It's exhausting to even sit through a
Right.
meeting, much less try to do my work.
Right.
So then the final piece with that around around cameras is, not everybody lives in a nice house that wants where they want people to see,
Right.
right?
Right.
And
Right.
so just be mindful of the people behind the camera,
Right.
and ask yourself, do they really need to be on camera for the work to happen?
That's right. That's
That was
right.
a long explanation to that question, but
No, no, I love that. And I think, I mean, you listed several important points, and the very last one I want to talk about first of, do they really need to be on camera for the work to continue, right?
right.
There's one thing to want to foster connection and collaboration. There's another thing for that to be a need to be on camera for that to happen, right? And I
Yeah,
think, sometimes we don't always think about that. You just think, oh, well, we used to be all in person, so everybody should be on camera. There's a lot happening in these homes, right? In these
right.
spaces in your homes. Not everybody has an office, not everybody has a dedicated space. People may have other things that are going on in the background, and
Yeah,
that's part of life, right? You don't just shut that out because now the laptop's
right.
up and we're on Zoom. And so I think all of those things are important. The other thing that you were talking about is, when we think about remote, hybrid, in office, do you need to be in office? Right? Do you need to be in office
Right.
every day? Do you need to be in office one day a week? Do you need to just collaborate, or create some opportunities for
For
connection and
collaborate.
collaboration
That's it.
together?
That's it.
Right? Those are some really great points that you mentioned there. And we have to remember that, right?
Yeah.
We have to really remember that we are people, and our employees are people behind all of this, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so as we, talk about even just remote work, hybrid work, and the trends that are happening now, what are some of those emerging trends that you're seeing in the mental health and wellness space? Is there anything out there that, like, you're really excited about, or that you're seeing coming down the pipe that think is getting more traction?
Yeah. What I am enjoying right now, following is the use of AI in the workplace. I know there's a huge, like, there's a whole continuum on where people fall in terms of using it.
Right.
But I also think from that well-being perspective, it can be helpful for employees just in terms of reducing their stress and overwhelm.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I'm keeping an eye out on a lot as well in terms of how we using AI in the workplace to increase productivity and reduce some of that stress and overwhelm. Um, but I'm also continuing to watch conversations that are happening around the return to workspace,
Hmm.
because I do think a lot of organizations are going to struggle with that
Right.
still. And here's the reason why, Letitia. It goes back to something that you just said around creating the opportunities and let the employees kind of have discussion in terms of what works best.
Right.
That means that there are going to be some leaders that have to relinquish some, and I'm using my air quotes, control.
That's right. That's right.
Say it ain't so, right?
That's right.
And but trust the people that you hired to be the adults that they are. And it's not saying give everybody free reign, but try something out. I come from a world where we love to pilot things,
Right.
pilot it and see how it works, and say, okay, we're going to try it out and see and reevaluate it. But I
That's
think
right.
those are the two things that I am following very closely. Is what is the return to work? How's it really? Where's it really going to land? But also the use of AI.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the use of AI, not just even in the workspace, but even from a personal
Mhm,
standpoint, right? Like,
mhm.
when you think about stressors, or triggers, or things that are happening in your mental health, AI is an amazing resource to give you some quick tips, some things to look up, some
Yep.
things to just get out how you're feeling. Like, it will really give you kind of some first step guidance on, like, some places to go and look. And
Right.
I think it's such a great resource that I don't know. I know it's getting more and more traction, so I'm excited to see where it goes. But I think I've tried it, right? I've used it
Yeah.
even in trying to learn about better ways to manage my own mental health, better ways
Hmm.
to manage my
Hmm.
own stress. And I'm always amazed and blown away at how quickly it can produce these fabulous results and tips for me of things that I can do and try to kind of manage my own self when I might be in a moment of feeling stressed or overwhelmed. So I mean, I'm very excited about AI and where we're going with that.
Yeah, it's so funny as I hear people like, "Oh, AI is gonna take my job," but I'm like, how many of y'all have been original Apple iPhone users? Like Siri
Right.
been around for a minute.
That's
And
right.
I know people who have their whole house wired to Alexa.
That's right.
So you're not scared for AI to
That's right.
turn the lights on and off,
Right.
but it puzzles me, and it's just like, okay, and so I have to remind myself, okay, sit back, don't laugh in their faces because it is
Right.
comical,
Right.
but just say,
Right.
have you thought about, and not that it's going, the thing that I've learned in the some of the workshops that I've been to and hearing some experts in the field, you still have to have the human element to it, y'all,
That's right.
because there's a there's a lawyer now. I don't know if they've been disbarred yet, but they there's this case of a lawyer in New York apparently
Mhm.
that was filing this brief and used Chat GPT.
Yep.
Well, this poor individual didn't think to do what every person probably should and proofread it,
That's right.
submitted it, and the case law that it quoted was were fake.
Right.
And so now they're up for, and I'm just like, you
Right.
went to law school, you're bright.
Right.
But again, it shows you in that moment. I'm sure he was like, I just got to get this done, or she, I don't, or they, right? I just got to
Right.
get this done. I can't imagine the stresses that made them feel that they
Right.
didn't have time to check it. So I
Right.
don't want to
Right.
dismiss their feelings, but just pause. So that's a great example. We still gonna need human beings.
That's right.
We're
It's
still gonna
right.
use people, and so find ways to use it as a tool. It's
That's
just
right.
like if we get these. Here's a great example: mouse pad,
That's right.
everybody, ergonomic keyboards. You
That's
know,
right.
everybody's got the gaming. So we have all these ergonomic things for our
Right.
bodies. Use AI as a tool, just like we would an ergonomic keyboard.
That's right. That's right.
It's a
It's a
resource.
support tool. Right.
It's a
Exactly.
support tool. Absolutely. It's
Something
not
to
going to be
help
out there
you.
trying to do heart surgeries. At
That's
least I hope.
right. That's right.
But
That's
again,
right.
we also have robotics now where people can literally do a full hysterectomy with the incision of three little dots in your stomach.
Right.
So y'all, we
Right.
we're
We've
there.
continued.
AI
Yeah.
has been around, and people are still connected to it.
I always think about and I hope I'm not dating myself too much, but remember the Flintstones, right? When they had the phone and you could see each other, and back then we were like, the phone, they could see each
Right?
other. How long we been doing FaceTime, right? How long we been doing
And
that?
the Jetsons and their little cars, their little space, like you, I
That's who
mean,
it was, the Jetsons, the
like,
Jetsons.
come
That's right.
on, yeah,
Yeah,
it's, but change is scary, right? And
yeah, it
so,
is. It is.
I
And I
just
think
always,
though, I
yeah,
just
go
was
ahead.
gonna add that I think, in order to not be afraid of change, is that you have to kind of immerse yourself.
You do.
Start to use some of these tools,
Hmm.
start to try, because then one, you won't feel so left behind because we are moving
Yep.
forward, right? The world is going to continue to move forward. There'll be
Hmm.
something else next month, something else next year,
Yep.
something else 5 years from now. So the world is going to continue to move forward, and it's
Yep.
up to us to not be left behind, right? And
That's it.
try to learn some of these skills. YouTube is an amazing
Amazing.
resource. There's tons of videos and resources. I find I was trying to unclog my sink, unclog my
YouTube, honey.
garbage disposal. And YouTube had a video, found it in
Same.
2 seconds, and was able to do it. And granted,
Hmm.
that's not going to be everything, but it's a tool. These are resources to kind
So,
of help you in some of those smaller things. I'm
yeah.
not saying that you don't need experts, because you still do,
Right.
right? But
Hmm.
these are tools and resources to support us in our day-to-day activities. So don't be afraid of it,
Don't be afraid of it. Yeah,
That's
lean into
right.
it.
That's right.
It makes me think about like transition from manual typewriters to now I'm really dating myself, to semi-electric typewriters, to the first kind of computer like Commodore 64. That's how old I am. To, yeah, and so to now where we are, like,
Right.
and and there's some people who along the way we were kicking and screaming,
That's right.
right? But
That's right.
now the thought of, oh my goodness, trying to type on a manual typewriter now,
Yeah.
baby, I
Yeah.
can get my home keys right, but I you don't have to mash as hard on a keyboard as a manual type. So yeah, lean into it
Right.
and learn about it and how it can support you. And I think that's the thing for me in terms of well-being and AI. We're seeing so many organizations, companies come up with tools. Now I always tell people, make sure you vet
That's
your
right.
tools,
That's
because
right.
not everything available is going to be is helpful or is meant for good intentions.
That's right.
But when you carefully source things, there are some great options out there.
That's right. That's right. Thank you for that. So, Ruby, I have one more question that I want to
Okay.
ask you, and I think it's important that when we, as we talk about being human, right,
Mhm.
and being people, uh, as the expert in this space, right, with all of your knowledge and skills that you bring to this, how do you maintain your own mental health and wellness, right? Are there practices or things that you do particularly that you find beneficial?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, I have learned to practice what I preach.
that's
And,
very
and
good.
people might can't see it, but I'm gonna try to hold it up. This T-shirt says my peace is more important. If you
I
want one,
love
go to
that.
blackwellness.com. This is not a paid advertisement, but I love this shirt because my peace is more important. I thankfully, because I am an entrepreneur, I get to control my calendar. And one of the things that when early on in this journey, I was sitting at my desk 10 and 12 hours, and I was like, girl, you didn't work this hard for the state. Why are you working this hard for yourself?
Right.
Because you got to make the money. If you don't make the money, and then I
Right.
was like, but you're tired. And so one of the things I did early on, I shifted my schedule so that there are 2 days a week that I have available on my calendar for meetings in the morning, and there's 2 days a week I have time open in the afternoon. Those opposite times, I'm doing like admin stuff, whether
Mhm.
it's reaching out to new clients, updating content. But then Fridays are my protected day.
I love that.
Um, my Fridays are my self care day, and self care is not about manicures and pedicures.
All right.
Self care is for me is that's my boundary for doing the things that I enjoy. Like today is Friday, and I laid around in my bed and was texting a
Mhm.
good friend of mine. Me and her were going back and forth until like 10 o'clock, and I was like, "Girl, let me get up from here because I got to go shower and get dressed for this podcast because." This is something that brings me joy. And then
Yeah.
when we finish, I'm gonna go get my favorite chair and watch NCIS reruns. So I really try to protect my Fridays
Yeah.
for that to do whatever I want to do. Sometimes it involves going to get my hair done or getting a massage, but usually for me it's sitting around, as my daughter says, sitting around in the house and rotting away on the chair. Because I just need to be still. I am an introvert in an extroverted world,
Yeah.
so I need my Fridays to recharge. The other thing too that I do for self-care that I've really worked hard on the last 4 years. I have 22-year-old twin girls, and I have really worked hard to be a consultant mama. And not that, hey, you figure it out, but let them now learn to navigate their challenges themselves, as opposed to me jumping in, mama, let me fix it. Let me tell you what you need to do.
Right.
Because when I'm doing that, I'm stressing out when I don't
Right.
need to be because they didn't ask me for all that. And then
Right.
they're stressed out because like you're doing the most. Let me be me. And so I have okay, let me you let me know when you need me. And so those are just a couple of things that I do.
That reminder was for me, so thank you.
Girl, let me tell you something. To anybody, whether you're a parent of a two-legged human being or a four-legged fur animal, or you're a caregiver
Right.
to anybody, the one of the best gifts that we can give ourselves and those that we care about is taking care of ourselves. And we have got as a society, and I'm not going to say as women because this is not just about women. I know some men who my father-in-law literally died taking care of his wife.
Right.
And so we have got to stop running ourselves into the ground for the sake of taking care of others. We really have to take care of ourselves. And again, self-care is not about going spending money on things.
Right.
It can be a part of self-care, but self-care are boundaries.
Right.
Self-care is you know what? Before my next Teams meeting or my next Zoom meeting, I'm going to sit here in my chair and take
Yep.
2 deep breaths.
Yep.
Or self-care is one of the things I do every morning when I get up. My husband usually is at work at 6:30, 7 o'clock. I'm asleep. So when I get up and come to my home office, I come through the living room, I open the front door, I step out, deep breath just to get that cold air in, and then I go sit down. And
Right.
so it's finding that minute or two to take care of yourself, even if it is just closing your eyes and taking a deep breath, or close your eyes and imagine yourself in your favorite space.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that. And I think, it makes me think about when you're on the airplane and they say, put your mask on
Oh,
first before
master
you help
man.
someone else.
Hmm.
That's what this makes me think about. And it's so important to fill up your own cup because you really won't be able to support others if you are not in a good place
Absolutely.
yourself. So
Absolutely.
Ruby, I have enjoyed this conversation. I think you
Me
have dropped so
too.
many good gems for our listeners here. Tell people, how can they find you? How can they connect with you? Where can they get more of this great information?
Yeah, you can check out my website, rubybrownherring.com. That's Ruby like the gem, brown like the crayon, herring like the fish. .com. You can also find me on Instagram at RBH Wellness and on LinkedIn, Ruby Brown Herring or RBH Wellness Solutions.
Perfect. And I will drop those links in the description of this podcast as well so that everyone can have it just to click on. But thank you for sharing a little bit of your
Thank you.
Friday with us. We know
Thank
this
you.
day is precious for you, so we appreciate you taking time to talk to us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.